Every morning he woke up at 5 a.m. Every day at 3:30 p.m. he went for a walk, so punctually that neighbors set their clocks by him. Immanuel Kant lived a monotonous life in provincial Königsberg, but his mind traveled farther than the ships departing from the local port. He never married, never sought fame, never pursued wealth. Instead, he asked questions that revolutionized philosophy. How is scientific knowledge possible? Does free will exist? What makes an action moral? His answers proved revolutionary. Kant demonstrated that reason does not reflect the world, but shapes it. That morality is not rules imposed from outside, but a law we give ourselves. That a human being is not a pawn in the hands of fate, but a free creature capable of autonomous choice. From a quiet study was born a philosophy that changed civilization. And now we will embark on a fascinating journey in which we will completely explore all of Immanuel Kant's philosophy. Let's talk about the early days of Immanuel Kant and how he developed his groundbreaking ideas. Born on April 22, 1724, in Königsberg, Prussia, Kant grew up in a lively city buzzing with trade and new ideas, thanks to a prominent university in the area. His father made a living as a harness maker, while his mother was deeply religious and instilled a hunger for learning and a strong moral compass in young Immanuel. Their family belonged to the Pietist movement, a branch of Protestantism that emphasized personal religious experience and moral integrity over rigid doctrines. This upbringing had a lasting impact on Kant, particularly his focus on moral duty and valuing practical reason over pure theorizing. Growing up, Kant was surrounded by a multicultural blend with German, Polish, Russian, and Lithuanian influences all around him in Königsberg. Every day, ships arrived with both goods and fresh ideas from across Europe. The local university attracted scholars from various German-speaking areas, creating an intellectually stimulating environment that profoundly influenced Kant's development. This melting pot of cultures and ideas sparked Kant's vision of a global community united in the pursuit of lasting peace. At 16, Kant took a major step by enrolling at the University of Königsberg, where he was introduced to Christian Wolff's philosophical system. Wolff, building on Leibniz's rationalism, held that all knowledge could come from pure reason. But Kant didn't stop there. He also studied under Martin Knudsen, who exposed him to the empirical methods of Isaac Newton and the skepticism of David Hume. This blend of rationalism and empiricism laid the groundwork for Kant's eventual revolutionary synthesis. Kant's favorite teacher, Knudsen, was a unique blend of deep faith and cutting-edge science. Knudsen was one of the first German scholars to grasp the revolutionary nature of Newtonian physics. Under his mentorship, Kant began pondering an intriguing question. If nature obeyed universal laws that reason could decipher, could it be the same for human thoughts and actions? When Kant was just 22, his father died in 1746, leaving the family in financial hardship. This forced Kant to pause his studies and work as a private tutor for wealthy families in rural areas. Although tough, these 9 years of relative solitude turned out to be crucial for his intellectual growth. With fewer academic obligations, he engaged deeply with philosophical and scientific inquiries, leading to his first significant work, Thoughts on the True Estimation of Living Forces. In it, Kant delved into a debate between the followers of Leibniz and Newton on measuring physical forces. While initially overlooked, this work showcased Kant's unique approach of merging conflicting viewpoints rather than taking sides. This would come to define his mature philosophy, emphasizing the roles of both reason and experience in understanding the world. By 1755, Kant was back at the university, earning his doctorate and beginning his career as a lecturer. Over the next 15 years, he lectured on a wide range of subjects: math, physics, geography, anthropology, logic, metaphysics, and ethics, pushing him to explore how these diverse fields interconnected. He started recognizing that all human pursuits, from science to moral reasoning and even the arts, might be linked by core principles. During what's known as his pre-critical period, Kant made notable contributions in several areas, including astronomy and anthropology. One of his works, Universal Natural History and Theory of the Heavens, introduced the nebula hypothesis about how the solar system formed. This underscores Kant's knack for engaging with some of the most profound questions out there. Instead of simply focusing on individual incidents, he wanted to understand the fundamental rules that govern everything in the universe. It was David Hume's books from the 1760s that jolted Kant out of what he described as his dogmatic sleep. Hume argued that we can't ever totally justify believing in cause and effect, the existence of the outside world, or even our identity over time. If Hume's view was correct, then things like science, morality, and normal everyday thinking had no solid foundation. This line of thinking seemed to lead straight to questioning all human knowledge. But Kant realized that although Hume's criticisms dismantled older philosophical ideas, they also hinted at a solution to the problem. The issue wasn't that human reasoning was defective, but that philosophers misunderstood how it worked. They assumed knowledge had to come solely from pure reasoning without any experience, or entirely from experience without reasoning. Kant thought this division was incorrect. What if acquiring knowledge needs both the sensory data we gain from experiences and the way our reasoning organizes that data? What if our minds actively shape how we experience things instead of merely soaking them up? What if ideas like space, time, and causation are not traits of objects that exist independently of us, but are contributions from our mind? These revolutionary thoughts became the backbone of Kant's critical philosophy. He had a big realization. The ability that helps us comprehend the natural world might also be where our sense of moral responsibility originates. Reason not only uncovers the laws of nature, but also lays down rules for human behavior. Just like natural laws are universal and necessary, moral laws should be the same way. This led Kant to develop his well-known categorical imperative and his theory of humans as self-ruling moral beings. By 1770, he had the outline of his critical philosophy, though it took another 11 years to fully develop his ideas and publish his first significant work. In this period, known as his silent decade, Kant was involved in what he called the hardest intellectual task of his life. He wasn't just coming up with new philosophical ideas, he was creating a whole new way to address the essential questions about human life. In the end, he produced 3 major works that together are seen as some of the most outstanding contributions in the history of human thought. Part 2. At the age of 57, Kant rocked the philosophical world with the publishing of The Critique of Pure Reason in 1781. This wasn't just any regular book. It was an incredibly detailed work that emerged after more than a decade of Kant exploring the depths of human understanding. He confessed that he grappled with these ideas for almost 12 years, but once he started writing, it all poured out in just 4 to 5 months during a burst of creative energy. This quick writing phase points to just how well he had organized his ideas from years of pondering. So, what's the deal with this first critique? It tackles a question that sounds simple. How can we have synthetic, a priori knowledge? To see why this question shook things up, we need to dig into what Kant meant. Analytic judgments are things like declaring all bachelors are unmarried, where the answer is already part of the question. On the other hand, synthetic judgments introduce new information, like saying, this bachelor is tall. A priori knowledge is what you can figure out without direct experience, unlike a posteriori knowledge, which you gather from actual experiences. The conventional wisdom back then was that a priori knowledge had to be analytic, and synthetic knowledge had to come from experience. But Kant had a different take. He noticed that math and basic scientific truths are both synthetic and a priori. Take mathematics, for instance. Statements like 7 plus 5 equals 12 are synthetic because you won't find 12 hiding in 7 or 5. Yet, these mathematical truths aren't derived from past experiences. They're universally valid and necessary. In science, principles like every event has a cause are synthetic, since the notion of causality isn't intrinsically contained in the idea of an event. But these principles apply to all possible experiences, not just isolated instances we've encountered. Realizing this kind of knowledge highlighted that the mind actively shapes our experiences. If we were merely passive observers, our knowledge would either be strictly analytic or entirely based on empirical evidence. The universal and necessary truths we know about the world reveal that our minds impose patterns and frameworks on sensory information. This was the core of what Kant called transcendental idealism. Kant divided the critique into two main sections: the transcendental aesthetic, focusing on how we perceive the world through our senses, and the transcendental logic, which explores the concepts and rules through which we understand. Each section examines different ways the mind independently molds our experiences. The aesthetic argues that space and time aren't inherent qualities of objects, but are the lenses through which we must view any object. Meanwhile, the logic portion lays out 12 key categories that we use to transform our raw perceptions into a coherent understanding of objects. Kant's approach in this critique broke new ground. He called it transcendental analysis because it sought to unearth the a priori conditions necessary for the possibility of experience. Instead of asking what we can know about different objects, Kant explored what must be true about our cognitive faculties for us to experience the world as we do. This perspective shift marked Kant's Copernican Revolution in philosophy. Kant's work set clear boundaries on what pure reason could accomplish. We can rely on reason for true knowledge about things we could realistically experience. When reason attempts to stretch beyond its bounds to consider things in themselves, it inevitably leads to confusion and erroneous ideas. Therefore, any traditional metaphysics claiming to prove the existence of God, the soul's immortality, or the freedom of the will using pure reason is dismissed as implausible. However, these limits on knowledge weren't Kant being pessimistic. In fact, it was the opposite. By outlining precisely what pure reason could and couldn't achieve, he provided a solid foundation for math, natural sciences, and empirical knowledge. He clarified why venturing beyond possible experiences in metaphysics couldn't produce anything valuable. In short, Kant felt he needed to limit knowledge to make space for belief. When Kant first published his critique, hardly anyone paid attention, and those who did found it really tough to grasp because it was so deep and abstract. Some even thought it was similar to Berkeley's idealism, thinking it suggested that material objects didn't really exist. This misunderstanding really got to Kant, so he spent a lot of time trying to make things clearer in later writings. Fast forward to 1787, and he released a revised second edition, packed with significant updates. He added important explanations and a whole new section called The Refutation of Idealism. The point of this was to clarify that his idea of transcendental idealism actually supported a kind of empirical realism. While things like space, time, and other concepts stem from the mind, he emphasized that things we come across in space and time, like tables, chairs, and trees, absolutely exist. These tangible objects exist independently of our minds, yet still depend on human experience in a broader sense. For those who understood it, the first critique was a real game changer. It shook up the philosophical scene significantly. It essentially ended the reign of rationalist metaphysics, which had been dominating German philosophy for over a century. It also highlighted some shortcomings in British empiricism, all while reinforcing the importance of experience. Most crucially, it provided new insights into the relationships between mind and world, between subjects and objects, and between what we perceive and reality itself. Part 3. Space and Time as Inner Tools. In the mind-blowing opening of Critique of Pure Reason, Kant drops some of his most revolutionary ideas. He turns everything on its head by arguing that space and time aren't just elements of reality existing on their own. Instead, they're like filters built into us that shape how we perceive everything. It's a total game changer for our understanding of the physical world, mathematics, and even our view on life. To grasp Kant's perspective, it's crucial to differentiate between two elements, sensation and intuition. Picture sensation as the disorganized flood of raw data hitting our senses. It's pure chaos without any form. Meanwhile, intuition is what happens when sensation gets ordered and structured in space and time. It transforms into a cohesive experience where objects are placed within time and space, making sense of the raw data. Kant goes all in to argue that space and time don't inherently belong to things as they are in themselves. His metaphysics revolve around the assumption that before experiencing anything, we presuppose the existence of space and time. It's tough to imagine objects existing without being located somewhere within space and time. But we can ponder empty space or time without objects, showing they're the foundational frameworks for anything to occur. He then takes the plunge into the transcendental argument, asserting that space and time aren't absorbed from experience but are rather frameworks present before experience. This is why math holds up so solidly. It's not based on abstract ideas, but on literal drawing and counting in space and time. The undeniable truths of geometry and arithmetic make sense only if space and time are hardwired into us. And here's the twist. The physical universe, as we perceive it, it operates within this space-time framework crafted by our minds. The chair you're sitting on, the room you're in, your own body, all of these are part of this mind-structured reality. They're not illusions, but our appearances shaped by our perception. This isn't just philosophical banter, it has big implications for science too. Everything described by physics about the universe relies on space and time. Still, these aren't features independent of our minds. While science teaches us a lot about reality, it all goes through our mental filters. What's the world like if we strip those away? Physics doesn't tackle that question. Kant also revamps our view of math. Forget about math as just a tool or an abstract realm. It's deeper and tied to how we must process any experience. Geometric truths are correct because the space we perceive is fundamentally organized that way. Time follows the same logic. It's critical not only for navigating our inner thoughts, but for managing everything we experience. Whether it's remembering the past, anticipating the future, or forming our identity, it all flows through the conduit of time. But wait a minute. If space and time are in our minds, what about the rest? Kant reassures us that there are things existing independently of our perceptions, but they're not bound by the spatial and temporal dimensions we perceive. That's quite a puzzle, right? Trying to imagine things that aren't limited by space or time is quite a mental gymnastics routine. But Kant believed this isn't an issue with reality itself, but with our perception. While we can think about something existing beyond time and space, picturing or directly experiencing it is a different ball game. Here's where Kant's puzzle gets even more intricate. How can things that aren't in space or time affect us in a way our senses detect, which our minds then process in space and time? Causality is usually thought of as something happening over time. So how does something outside of time cause anything we experience? Kant saw this as a real head-scratcher. He suggested we bear in mind the difference between cause and effect as we experience it in space and time, and the mysterious connection between the true nature of things and how they appear to us. Even now, experts see a lot of relevance in Kant's perspective about space and time being frameworks our minds use to interpret what we perceive, though not everyone agrees entirely. Over the years, his insight that our brains shape our experiences instead of merely absorbing them has become more apparent. This concept is a significant influence today in both modern philosophy and cognitive studies. While not everyone embraces Kant's notion that space and time are entirely a construct of our minds, his arguments challenge the straightforward idea that we merely observe the world as it truly is. The relationship between us and the world is much more intricate and profound than it initially appears. Part 4. Part 4 of Kant's stuff is all about how we make sense of the world with our minds. First, he said that space and time set the stage for everything we perceive. Now, he's into the nitty-gritty. How does our brain take all this sensory data and turn it into a clear picture of things around us? Kant says it's all about these mental tools called the pure concepts of understanding, or categories. Imagine them as the built-in gear we've got in our heads. We need them to give meaning to any experience. He argued that our brains don't just soak up objects directly. Instead, we decode the sensory chaos using these ideas. Think of it like this. Unlike some sort of supermind that instantly gets everything, we've got to do a little groundwork. We connect the dots, using concepts to organize the sensory chaos into something that makes sense. Without these categories, all those sights, sounds, and feels would just be a big jumble. The real kicker in Kant's theory was figuring out where these categories come from. He realized that thinking is about making judgments, and making judgments involves applying ideas through a certain logic. Traditional logic lists 12 types of judgments, like universal, particular, and singular. Kant matched each judgment type to a corresponding concept or category, creating 12 categories divided into 4 sets of 3. For quantity, there's unity, plurality, and totality. For quality, we have reality, negation, and limitation. The category of relation includes substance and accident, causality and dependence, and community or reciprocity. Lastly, for modality, we consider possibility and impossibility, existence and non-existence, and necessity and contingency. These categories play huge roles in how we understand and interpret our surroundings. Take the category of substance. It helps us differentiate between steady objects and their changing properties, letting us recognize that things persist despite changes. Causality lets us understand how events link together instead of just seeing them as a random sequence. And unity, that's what helps us see a bunch of traits as part of a single object, not just scattered details. But here's a tricky bit Kant faced. How do these mental tools really line up with the real world we sense? This is what he called the problem of the transcendental deduction of the categories. It wasn't enough to have these categories. He had to prove they worked with real experiences. To tackle this issue, Kant demonstrated that the same mind that organizes concepts also structures what we sense. It's not just about having concepts. It's about connecting the sensory dots to paint a coherent world picture. So, these categories must apply to any experience we might have. A huge part of this is what Kant described as the transcendental unity of apperception. Simply put, he argued that every thought or perception has to be something I relate to my own thinking self. This idea of I think isn't something we perceive. It's more like the foundation that enables us to organize experiences in the first place. When we consider how we experience things, there's this thing called the transcendental unity of self-consciousness that's at play. This helps us craft a cohesive experience of the world using these categories. This all ties back to one of Kant's key ideas. We don't encounter isolated, standalone stuff. Instead, what we experience are appearances shaped by how our minds interact with them. So, when you're looking at a house, you're not just absorbing raw data from an independently existing house. Nope. Your mind is actively sorting through your sensory info with these categories, like substance, unity, and plurality, to build your experience of a house. The house is real, but its meaning comes from the way we humans think and process everything around us. These categories do more than just categorize things. They lay the foundation for what we call principles of pure understanding. These principles involve these fancy synthetic, a priori judgments that are universally relevant when we experience the world. Think of things like intuition axioms, which say all the things we sense are larger frameworks that we measure using space and time. Then there's the anticipation of perception, which says sensations have different intensity levels. Next up, the analogies of experience include principles like substance, causation, and interaction. And finally, the postulates of empirical thinking focus on determining what's possible, what's real, and what's necessary in our experiences. One of the most famous among these is the second analogy, which claims that all changes we observe happen according to a cause and effect chain. This is not just about explaining how things occur around us. It's about saying that this causal relationship is crucial for making sense of our experiences. Without grasping the sequence of cause and effect, we couldn't figure out whether events are objectively happening over time or if they're just a jumble of our personal thoughts. Causation is like a mental tool we use to order our experiences, giving them meaning and making them manageable, rather than simply being something we find in experiences themselves. Part 5. Linking Categories and Experience in Kant's Philosophy. The part of Kant's work called the transcendental deduction is a bit of a brain bender, but it's super important. In it, Kant tries to show that these 12 categories he talks about must be part of any experience we have. If he can't prove this, those categories are just like theoretical ideas with no real proof they connect to the outside world we interact with. How well he argues this point really matters because it affects his whole theory about knowing things that are evident by thought rather than experience, without getting stuck in a corner of strict logic or endless doubting about reality. Kant stumbled upon a philosophical problem that no one had tackled before. Earlier thinkers pretty much assumed our ideas lined up with reality. They figured this was true because concepts either were gifts from God or came straight from what we experience. But Kant flipped the script, saying that the fundamental ideas we use to make sense of things, the categories he identified, didn't just pop up with us at birth or directly from our experiences. Instead, these are like tools our minds bring to the table whenever we experience anything. But this raised a big question. How can we trust these categories apply to stuff in the real world? Kant's solution is to show that the mental processes we use to find unity in our thoughts also create that same unity in our experiences. His reasoning unfolds through a series of logical steps, each underlining how our understanding actively shapes our experiences. His key insight is that we don't just passively absorb information from the outside world. We're actively structuring it through our understanding and certain pre-established rules. It all starts with what Kant calls the transcendental unity of apperception. This isn't about knowing you're a person with certain traits, but setting the scene or the groundwork for even being able to make sense of yourself or have an experience. For an experience to make sense, all our perceptions should be able to join up under a single awareness. Kant expressed this by saying, everything we perceive must connect with the I think in our heads. Otherwise, they're useless to us. Yet, this unity of understanding isn't just sitting there waiting. It comes from actively bringing things together in our brain. The impressions we get from the world around us are like this ongoing flow of different inputs with no unity. To mold these into a whole experience, Our mind has to organize them according to set principles. This process, which Kant called the transcendental synthesis of imagination, gets its direction from the categories, giving us a framework to connect what we perceive. What's groundbreaking about Kant's take is how he argues the same mental work that helps us claim ownership of our perceptions also constructs the objectness of our experiences. Take seeing a house, for instance. The mental hustle that lets us think all these visuals are mine is the same one transforming those visuals into recognizing an object. It's not like understanding yourself comes first, then linking it to objects. Rather, the act of mentally mixing up concepts delivers a united sense of self and an understanding of objects at the same time. This intertwining means those categories Kant talks about are essential, like they have to stick to anything we might experience. We don't just come across isolated things we label after the fact. Instead, stuff becomes objects because we slap on those categories to raw sensory input. Without these guidelines, what we'd experience would just be a chaotic mess, without any order or meaning. Kant made this point clearer by giving a famous example about time sequences, how they can be subjective or objective. If you look at a house, you can start wherever you want, top, bottom, whatever. That's subjective. It's your choice and doesn't actually say anything about the nature of the house. On the flip side, seeing a ship move downstream has a set sequence. You see it move first to one spot, then the next. That's an objective and necessary order. You can't just change willy-nilly. The reason this sequence holds objectively, it's all thanks to the category of causality, which organizes our sensory experiences. All right, here's the lowdown. The whole deal with this deduction stuff is that it explains how we can have a kind of knowledge that isn't based on experience, yet still applies to it. So, here's how it breaks down. The experiences we have are basically molded by categories we use on them. These categories are like built-in concepts we grasp from the start, meaning we can already sort out that everything we come across follows specific categorical rules. It's not just about putting random shapes on some reality sitting out there on its own. These snippets of experience only shape up into what they are because our mind actively assembles them. To have an experience, bottom line, is to have these mental blueprints constructing it. But hang on, there's a catch. These categories work their wonders only on stuff we might potentially experience, and that's the limit. We can't slap those categories on things we could never possibly encounter. When we try to reach beyond what we can realistically know, the link with our sense perception fades, leaving us with empty notions that don't hold water in the real world. Over the years, this transcendental deduction idea saw some big tweaks between the first and second editions of the critique. Initially, the first edition emphasized how imagination plays a big role in putting everything together. By the time the second edition rolled out, the focus shifted more to the role of understanding and self-awareness. Although they both aim for the same target, they approach it a bit differently. What stays rock solid is this key idea. What lets us have a unified sense of self is also what lets us have a smooth, flowing experience of the world around us. Nowadays, philosophers are still hashing it out over whether Kant got it right. Some folks argue he's mixing up how we structure things in our minds with what's logically necessary to experience them. Others feel he nailed it by showing how vital categorical synthesis is for making sense of our surroundings. Regardless of where you land on this debate, the essence is that the transcendental deduction has seriously changed how we view the relationship between our minds and the world, leaving a big imprint on philosophy as we know it. Part 6. Immanuel Kant stirred up quite a storm with his deep thoughts about phenomena and noumena, which are central to what he called transcendental idealism. These were such groundbreaking concepts in philosophy. His insights came from works like Transcendental Aesthetic and Transcendental Analytic. Basically, Kant said that humans can only truly understand things that we can experience firsthand. To get a handle on this, we need to explore what Kant meant by phenomena and noumena and how these ideas fit into the big picture of his philosophy. When we talk about phenomena, we're not dealing with imaginary or mystical stuff. Instead, we're talking about things we can know and see, like the tree outside your window. That's a phenomenon. While it exists in the real world, how we perceive it is influenced by our human experience. The tree exists in space and time because that's how we, as humans, perceive our surroundings. It doesn't make the tree any less real. Rather, it's our version of reality. Kant was clear that this reality isn't fake. It's genuine, but only within the boundaries of how we understand things. Stuff we study scientifically or see every day is real, but it doesn't just hang out in space and time without being tied to our minds. They're real in terms of how we experience them. Then there's the idea of noumena, or things in themselves. These are enigmatic and exist independently of how we perceive the world. We can think about these things, but we can't truly know them because our understanding is limited by our human perspective. Kant stressed the importance of acknowledging our cognitive limits so we don't mistakenly believe our perceptions fully capture reality. Here's where things get tricky. How do phenomena and noumena relate? This question has sparked a lot of debate. Some see them as two sides of the same coin, different perspectives on the same thing. Others say they're completely separate entities. Both views venture into some pretty convoluted philosophical territory. The two-aspect theory suggests we're just observing the same thing, but from different angles, like viewing yourself as controlled by natural laws, as a phenomenon, and as a being with free will, as a noumenon. It's all about looking at the same person from different perspectives. Still, explaining how our understanding can be influenced if they're just two sides of the same thing? That's a brain bender. Kant suggested that phenomena are how things in themselves make an impression on our senses, implying they're different yet capable of interaction. To avoid these conundrums, some people go for the two-object theory, treating phenomena and noumena as separate entities. This view ties in with how Kant describes things in themselves affecting us, providing the raw experiences that shape our perception of reality. Even if we can't know what these unseen things are, we know they must be doing something in the background. But this idea runs into a major snag. It makes things in themselves completely unknowable while claiming they exist and impact us. If concepts like existence and causation only apply to things we can perceive, how can we even talk or think about noumena, unfathomable things, as if they exist and cause our sensory experiences? This contradiction seems to be a big flaw in Kant's thinking. It's like using concepts Kant restricts to our known world to assert things about an unknown world. The core issue with the distinction between phenomena, what we can perceive, and noumena, what we can't, is a dilemma often called the problem of affection. Kant needs these unknowable things to trigger our senses, to give us the raw content our minds mold into experiences. But here's the rub. Affection is a kind of cause and effect happening in time, and Kant argued that both causation and time are phenomena we perceive. So, how can these timeless, non-causal things affect our time-bound senses? Some philosophers attempt to resolve this by distinguishing between empirical affection, which happens in our observable world, and transcendental affection, which lies beyond time and constitutes the foundation for phenomena found in things themselves. Some folks think that affection isn't about cause and effect. Instead, it's more like a concept showing just how limited and open human understanding can be. But others think Kant's view is a total mess and should either be thrown out or completely revamped. Even though his ideas can give you a headache, the split between phenomena and noumena is hugely important in Kant's philosophy. It provides insight into how we can have genuine knowledge, yet accept that it's still somewhat restricted. This idea lays the groundwork for Kant's moral theories by carving out a space where freedom has room to breathe. Moreover, it puts up a wall against pushing scientific ideas too far beyond where they should be. Ultimately, it keeps us in check about the boundaries of human thinking while supporting the valid claims of reason within those boundaries. Part 7. Okay, so let's jump into the deeper end of Kant's critique of pure reason, specifically the transcendental dialectic section. This part examines how pure reason, our capacity for thinking and understanding, sometimes leads us to think we know more than we can actually experience. These aren't just random errors we can straighten out by concentrating more. They're like built-in tricks that come with the territory when we use reason. By figuring out these illusions, we learn a lot about where human thinking shines and where it can fall short. Reason has this relentless drive to make sure all our knowledge is organized, seeking out complete and ultimate truths. It doesn't settle for just gathering bits of experience, but yearns for absolute certainty and core principles. This thirst works great when forming solid theories from what we observe. But when reason steps outside the bounds of experience, it stumbles upon contradictions known as antinomies. We run into 4 major antinomies with pure reason. These are tricky questions we can't resist, yet we can't really answer. Each antinomy is like a 2-sided coin, having a thesis, which is one idea, and an antithesis, the opposing idea, both seeming perfectly logical, yet clashing with each other. The first antinomy tackles whether the universe has any limits in space and time. The thesis claims the universe must have a starting line and be finite, arguing infinite sequences can't be completed. On the flip side, the antithesis argues there's no starting line or limit, because any beginning still demands a before or a boundary. Both seem bang on, but they nullify each other. Next, there's the issue of whether things are made from simple parts or if simplicity doesn't really exist. The thesis says everything must consist of simple parts because, mentally, we can break things down. Meanwhile, the antithesis contends that nothing truly simple exists, since everything occupying space can be endlessly divided. Both arguments make sense, but they can't both hold true. Then comes the third antinomy, questioning if all events can be traced to natural causes, or whether free will is also involved. The thesis champions free will, claiming that without it, we're stuck in an infinite chain of causes with no starting link. The antithesis insists free will isn't possible because that would upset the rule that every effect must follow a cause. This one's a real heavyweight because moral responsibility is grounded in free will, whereas science leans on the bedrock of cause and effect. The last antinomy tackles whether there's a necessary being, kind of like an underlying cause, involved in the universe. The thesis argues there has to be something absolutely necessary to avoid leaving the chain of dependence incomplete. Conversely, the antithesis argues no necessary being exists because it clashes with how things continually change. This dives into those age-old debates about the existence of God and all that. Kant comes to grips with these conundrums by focusing on the distinction between what we can experience, phenomena, and what we can't, noumena. For the first two antinomies, which involve quantity, he suggests dismissing both sides. The world's neither finite nor infinite because, as a concept, the whole world can't be fully captured by what we experience. We can keep diving deeper into learning about space and time, but we'll never grasp the full picture reason craves. As for the final two antinomies dealing with existence, Kant proposes something a bit different. Here, both sides might be valid, as long as we're careful about knowing where and how to apply those ideas. In the world of things we can see and touch, everything obeys specific natural laws, without exception. But when it comes to the unseen world, maybe there's room to wiggle. Imagine a series of events in our reality that doesn't need to hinge on a fixed cause, while there could still be a timeless being at the heart of it all. This way of thinking about two major debates lets us consider that moral freedom and spirituality can exist without clashing with scientific principles. Science, after all, claims that everything around us follows universal laws, whereas morality assumes rational people have free will of a different kind, beyond what we can observe. These concepts stay out of each other's way because they belong to different realms. For Kant, finding a balance between the laws of nature and moral freedom is a big piece of his philosophy. These debates also show how reason should operate. Instead of trying to reach for ultimate truths that are out of reach, reason should encourage us to make more connections in what we can see and understand. Big concepts like contemplating the soul, the universe, or God motivate us to seek understanding in areas like psychology, cosmology, and theology, even if final answers remain elusive. Using reason in this way is both valid and helpful, but using it to grasp things beyond what we can experience is misleading and causes confusion. This is because Kant thought humans are naturally drawn to ask metaphysical questions, despite the lack of concrete answers. Like how optical illusions trick our eyes, metaphysical illusions lead our reasoning off course. We can't eliminate these illusions, but we can learn to spot them and avoid being deceived. Recognizing these illusions for what they are is what Kant believed enlightenment was all about. not getting rid of illusions entirely, but seeing them clearly for what they are. Part 8. Once Kant finished his big project on pure reason, he found himself facing a massive philosophical puzzle. Although he'd managed to carve out a space for faith by setting limits on what we can know, he still hadn't put his finger on where faith, ethics, and practical thinking slid in. His work on pure reason had shown what couldn't be known through it, especially in terms of knowledge, but it raised new questions about stuff like free will, moral responsibilities, and life's meaning. These questions needed a whole new approach. After his first critique, Kant began to piece together his ideas on practical philosophy through a series of important writings. By 1785, he had set the stage for the metaphysics of morals, presenting the core principle of morality and the notion of the categorical imperative. And then, by 1788, with the Critique of Practical Reason, he delved deeper into moral psychology and the foundations of practical reasoning. Fast forward to 1797, the metaphysics of morals stepped it up by addressing the concepts of rights and virtues in detail. But even before these major works, Kant was dropping hints about his practical philosophy in various shorter pieces. Take his essay called "What is Enlightenment?" He described enlightenment as people breaking free from self-inflicted ignorance, encouraged by having the guts to trust their own reasoning. Then there's the idea for a universal history with a cosmopolitan purpose, where he sketches out humans gradually moving towards a worldwide family of republican states. These writings showed how Kant's detailed philosophy could grapple with real-world matters like education, politics, and societal advancement. The link between Kant's theoretical and practical philosophies is deeper than it might seem at first. Both are built on the key idea of the active, inventive nature of human reason. Just as our understanding actively combines raw experiences into structured objects, practical reason shapes our will based on its self-devised principles. In both cases, reason isn't just sitting there finding truths in the world. It creates the reality it engages with. This ties into Kant's broader belief in human worth and autonomy. Humans aren't simply biological beings confined by natural laws or just rational agents chasing happiness. Humans have the ability to establish rules for themselves in both understanding and action. This autonomy is what makes humans uniquely valuable, giving them worth beyond mere natural or economic measures. Freedom bridges Kant's theoretical and practical ideas nicely. In one of his well-known puzzles, the third antinomy, Kant argued that freedom is at least thinkable since the strict laws of nature only affect our perceptions, not things as they truly are. But for morality, that's not enough. Freedom needs to be real. The job of practical philosophy is to prove that freedom isn't just a concept we theorize about. It's a real thing we must recognize whenever we make moral choices or take action. Kant's adventure into practical philosophy was pretty revolutionary. While other moral thinkers might base ethical rules on human nature, divine insight, or the pursuit of happiness, Kant planted the roots of morality in reason alone. He claimed that moral truths must apply to every rational being, no matter their personal desires, situations, or cultural backgrounds. This implies that morality can't lean on anything tangible or changing. It must rest on pure, practical reason. Moving from an exclusively theoretical focus to getting hands-on also marked a shift in how reason functions. On the theoretical end, reason aids understanding by providing guiding principles that steer scientific inquiry towards a cohesive knowledge. But when it turns practical, reason actually creates the rules that steer our actions. Practical reason does more than just decide what should be done. It influences action by aligning our will with moral truths. This switch explains why practical reason can succeed where theoretical reason falls short. You see, while theory doesn't really give us a deep understanding of things as they truly are, our practical thinking actually shows us the essence of our freedom and morality. It's through our moral compass that we perceive ourselves as being part of a world governed by moral rules, not just the laws of nature. So, our sense of what's right and wrong allows us to grasp insights about the non-physical world that pure theory told us were out of reach. Kant believes that practical reasoning should take the spotlight because he's convinced that the really important stuff in life is about our actions, not just our knowledge. For him, knowledge holds its true value when it guides us to act ethically and enrich our lives. This doesn't mean he was against intellectual pursuits. On the contrary, he thought that smarts should eventually translate into real-world effects. Kant's emphasis on practical philosophy also mirrors his concern for the political and social transformations of his era. He witnessed major events such as the American and French Revolutions, along with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. His writings on morality and politics explored crucial topics like individual rights, democracy, international relations, and societal progress, which were central to the Enlightenment. Yet, Kant always addressed these issues from a philosophical standpoint, not as a mere strategy for political gain. Part 9. The categorical imperative. This has really changed how folks think about ethics and morality. Kant came up with this principle while trying to find a core rule that could lead our moral actions simply through reason, leaving out personal experiences or goals. To get the difference, think about a hypothetical imperative, like if you want to score a goal, kick the ball, versus a categorical imperative, which says, do this because it's the right thing to do, and it applies to everyone just because they have the ability to reason. Kant figured this out by really digging into how we naturally think about what's right and wrong. He realized that when we claim something is wrong, like lying, we're not only saying it's just wrong for us, but wrong for anyone in a similar situation. It's this universal side that gives moral judgment its weight, making it much more serious than just personal likes or smart moves. The most well-known way Kant put this imperative is, act only according to that principle which you would want everyone to follow as a universal law. This gets us to think about our actions and whether the rule we're acting on could work out if everyone did the same. If a rule can't sensibly be a rule for everyone, then it's probably wrong. But if everyone could consistently follow it, then maybe it's okay. And if it has to be followed, then it's something we should do morally. Kant shared a few classic scenarios to show how this test plays out. Think about lying to get out of financial trouble. If everyone lied like that, the concept of promising would fall apart because no one would trust promises anymore. The rule can't support itself, so it's not a moral action. Now consider not helping someone in need. Even if everyone ignoring each other doesn't involve a direct contradiction, we really can't want a world like that, because we'd all need help at some point. Hoping for such a selfish world doesn't really go hand in hand with wanting our well-being. Kant also introduced another important idea called the formula of humanity. This one is about acting in a way that treats humanity, in yourself and others, as an end and never just a means to an end. It's about respecting people's dignity, not treating them like tools. This doesn't mean you can't ask for help or join up with others, so long as their autonomy and goals are respected. This perspective helps catch some wrongs that the universal law idea might miss. When we lie, bully, or trick people, we're ignoring their ability to make their own choices. In the end, Kant believed these two viewpoints are really just two angles on the same idea. While the universal law formulation checks if an action could be universal, the formula of humanity zeroes in on respecting human reasoning. Both stem from the idea that we can create our own rules with our minds, deserving respect for that ability. Kant threw in a third perspective, the formula of the kingdom of ends, which mixes the big ideas from the first two. Here, we imagine a world full of rational beings sharing moral rules. In this kingdom, each rational being plays two roles. They help create universal moral rules and also follow the very ones they help make. This ideal community is what moral actions strive to achieve, a place where all rational entities give each other the respect due to free and responsible moral beings. The categorical imperative stands out from ethical approaches focusing on end results. For Kant, what makes an action hold moral value isn't what it achieves, but the rule or intention driving it. If you act from a duty, recognizing a moral rule's demand, the action has moral significance no matter what bad things might happen as a result. On the flip side, even if an action leads to good outcomes, it lacks moral worth if it's done selfishly instead of within a moral duty. Kant zeroed in on what drives our moral actions because he reckoned that the only thing truly good in itself is a good will. Things like smarts, courage, money, or even being happy could be twisted for bad purposes, so they aren't inherently valuable on their own. But a will that chooses based on moral duty, without getting tangled up in what we personally want or the fallout, is undeniably pure. It's this good will that gives us humans our special kind of dignity and lays down the bedrock for making moral judgments. Lately, experts have emphasized that Kant's categorical imperative shouldn't be mistaken for a simple how-to guide for cracking moral conundrums. Instead, it presents a fundamental principle that guides our moral reasoning and sheds light on why certain actions are right or wrong. Making decisions guided by this principle calls for a bit of insight and interpretation, which means folks might differ on how it applies in particular cases. Still, that doesn't take away from its position as the ultimate moral benchmark for every reasonable person. Part 10. Freedom, Autonomy, and the Goodwill. At the core of it all is freedom, which is super central to how Kant views morality and ties his practical philosophy directly to his theoretical ideas. Without freedom, holding anyone accountable wouldn't make sense, and applauding or blaming people would lose its punch. Also, without freedom, the idea of a categorical imperative, moral guidelines for everyone, wouldn't hold up. But figuring out how humans can be free in a world that seems ruled by hard and fast laws is a huge philosophical puzzle. Seriously, how are we supposed to exercise freedom when everything around us is driven by strict natural laws? Kant broke down freedom into several types, each playing a vital part in his moral theory. There's negative freedom, which is about acting without being driven by our wishes and impulses. Then there's positive freedom, which involves making our own choices guided by principles that reason tells us are universal. Lastly, there's transcendental freedom, which lets us start actions without being tied down by causes, making moral responsibility possible. Grappling with how this freedom fits with the unyielding rules of nature has puzzled philosophers for ages. How can our actions be genuinely free if the natural world follows set rules? Before Kant, some thinkers pretty much said, real freedom doesn't exist, it's all just natural causes, while others tried to create separate laws just for human actions. Both strategies left Kant dissatisfied because one wipes out moral responsibility and the other messes with the heart of natural science. Kant's solution banks on his idea of transcendental idealism and the distinction between how we perceive things, phenomena, and things as they really are, noumena. In our everyday experience, everything, including what we do, seems tied to natural laws. Every move we make looks predetermined, and scientifically speaking, our behavior could be predicted like any other event in nature. However, when it comes to our noumenal side, we aren't caught in the loop of cause and effect and have this transcendental freedom. It's not about acting on impulse, but on principles set by pure practical reason. By acting morally, we're not just responding to life's curveballs, but creating universal moral laws through reason. This reflects our real nature in that space governed by moral, not natural laws. Kant's idea of autonomy is a huge deal. Autonomy, meaning self-governance, suggests we as moral beings have to lay down the rules we follow ourselves. Unlike rules that might come from society, God, or just nature, autonomous principles stem from reason itself. Following the categorical imperative isn't just taking orders, it's creating universal laws through our rationality. That's what gives humans their unique dignity, making us ends in ourselves, never just means to an end. Because we can craft moral rules using reason, we hold a value beyond anything that can be priced or compared. This dignity isn't something you earn by achieving stuff, nor is it gifted by others. It's an inherent part of being a rational being with moral independence. This foundation backs the idea of human rights and ensures that everyone deserves genuine respect. Then there's Kant's concept of goodwill, which he famously says is the only thing that's purely good. This is about a will that goes for duty over personal wants consistently. It doesn't mean the results always pan out. Things can go awry, no matter how well-meaning you are. Instead, a good will sticks to what moral law says, no matter what you personally desire, any nudges from society, or expected results. Our natural tendency toward goodwill stems from our independence as thinkers, forming the basis of our moral value as reasoning individuals. Kant delves into the factors that push us to make moral decisions in a way that's both sophisticated and grounded in reality. He recognized humans as a blend of logic and emotions, not purely rational machines. We often feel moral duties as constraints because our desires frequently clash with moral demands. For a creature purely dictated by logic, acting morally wouldn't feel burdensome as it would naturally align with reason. Conversely, purely emotion-led beings would struggle with morality because they lack the faculty of rational choice. Thus, when we experience moral duties, it underscores our nature as both physical and spiritual beings. This sense of moral obligation opens our eyes to the fact that we transcend mere natural laws, moving towards a world influenced by reasoning rather than basic natural instincts. This awareness of moral consciousness offers tangible proof of our transcendental freedom, a notion that theoretical philosophy only suggested as possible. Kant emphasized that achieving true independence in making moral decisions requires maturity and enlightenment. Many people fail to reach genuine moral independence because they remain in a state of what Kant called self-imposed dependency, following others' moral codes instead of forming their own. To teach morals effectively, it's crucial to focus on nurturing independent moral judgment rather than merely promoting agreeable moral views. The goal is to develop individuals who can think for themselves morally, making choices and owning their responsibilities. Understanding how freedom and morality intertwine helps us see why teaching morals is both feasible and vital. If we were entirely governed by natural causes or absolutely free, there'd be no point in or need for moral education. But because we're a complex mix of logic and emotion, we have the potential to improve our moral reasoning through experience, reflection, and practice. This development doesn't occur automatically. It requires intentional effort and an environment that encourages rather than impedes our ability to make independent and moral choices. Part 11. Kant went on to release the Critique of Practical Reason in 1788. This was basically his way of bringing to a close his grand effort to figure out how we use reason in making everyday moral choices. This wasn't a mere follow-up to his earlier work. It took a fresh approach by addressing issues the first book didn't quite cover. While his groundwork was all about nailing down the basic idea of what morality is based on our daily moral experiences, this new book delved into what practical reasoning is truly about, how extensive it is, and how it fits into our more evidence-based grasp of the world. Kant crafted this critique in a way that echoed the structure of the Critique of Pure Reason, but he pointed out the essential differences in how practical reasoning operates. The analytics section nailed down how the moral law affects the real world and illustrated that practical principles can be understood through pure reason without needing personal experience. On the other hand, the dialectic section wrestled with the major dilemmas that practical reasoning faces when aiming for the ultimate good, which leads to the grand concepts of God, freedom, and immortality. By structuring these critiques in parallel, Kant was making a point that practical reasoning stands on its own, working alongside theoretical reasoning but not being subordinate to it. One of the coolest things Kant did in this second critique was dig into how emotions factor into our moral lives. He introduced this concept called respect, which is this unique feeling we get when we grasp the demands of morality. Unlike other emotions like desire or fear, respect arises straight out of our reasoning process and pushes us to act rightly, even when our own desires might be pulling us elsewhere. This idea opened up the question of how pure reason can actually motivate us, since people aren't just robots. We have feelings too. Kant was basically saying that our reasoning doesn't just override our feelings, but actually generates its own feeling, respect. Furthermore, Kant explored how we balance duty and inclination when making moral choices in our daily lives. He broke these choices down into three categories: actions that defy duty, actions that align with duty but are motivated by self-interest, and actions done purely because duty calls, regardless of personal wants. According to Kant, it's that third type that truly represents moral virtue. This part of his work stirred up a bit of dust. He argued that while it's not bad to act out of natural kindness, it can't be the cornerstone of morality because it's not always reliable or fair to everyone. Being kind when it suits us is definitely better than doing harm, but true moral goodness kicks in when we help others simply because we recognize their human dignity. People often misunderstood Kant on this point, assuming he believed we should be emotionless and like robots. But that wasn't his take at all. He wasn't against emotions. He was saying they shouldn't be the primary reason for doing what's morally right. If our duties align with our desires, hey, that's great. We can feel good about doing our duties while also enjoying the satisfaction our desires bring. The key is ensuring that duty is why we do good, not just because it feels good, even if both lead us down the same path. Plus, in the second critique, Kant really dived into how we can educate and develop our moral character as time goes on. The guy was arguing that being a good person isn't just something we come into the world with, it's something we build through consistent effort and attention. You can't just decide to be moral and be done with it. Instead, you've got to keep working on your sense of duty and try to manage those selfish urges. This journey of becoming a moral person doesn't really ever end. Since we're essentially rational yet flawed creatures, there's always a temptation to prioritize our own happiness over doing the right thing. According to Kant, true virtue lies in this constant moral endeavor. Virtue, to him, wasn't about becoming morally perfect. It was more about cultivating a mindset that resists urges that contradict our sense of duty. A person who is virtuous isn't someone without temptations, but rather someone who chooses what's right over personal desires when they conflict. This idea makes being virtuous challenging yet possible. It's tricky because you always have to stay vigilant, but it's doable since it relies on your choices, not on any special talents or fortunate conditions you might have. Kant also explored in his practical philosophy how we judge what's moral and apply ethical principles to real-world situations. He got that while the categorical imperative is the main guiding principle, it doesn't resolve every moral dilemma on its own. Applying these universal rules to real-life situations requires judgment, and even reasonable people may not always see eye to eye on what the right thing is in any given scenario. This doesn't make moral laws any less objective, but rather highlights the complicated nature of moral life and our imperfect understanding of it. Kant concluded his critique of practical reason with a well-known reflection on the starry heavens above us and the moral law within us. These two sources of wonder and reverence demonstrate the two ways we perceive ourselves and our place in the cosmos. The starry skies remind us of our smallness and dependence under a universe ruled by natural laws. In contrast, the moral law within points to our value and our freedom, showing us as beings who can create universal rules through reason. Together, they reveal the dual aspects of our existence. We are creatures of nature and moral beings, influenced by causality, yet capable of making free choices. Part 12. What can we hope for? After establishing that our duty is solid as a rock and that real moral value springs from respecting moral laws, Kant hits a roadblock. How could morals possibly ask us to achieve the impossible? It expects us to reach perfect virtue, but let's be honest here, us humans aren't exactly wired for flawlessness. Plus, there's the head-scratcher that says being virtuous is supposed to bring happiness, yet reality often shows good folks having a tough ride while those bending the rules seem to coast along. Kant refers to this dilemma as the antinomy of practical reason. On one hand, morality pushes us to strive for the highest good, a flawless blend of virtue and happiness. But on the other hand, this feels like chasing after rainbows. It seems impossible because either genuine virtue can't be attained or life's just not set up to reward it with joy. If we're expected to achieve this ultimate good but can't, acting morally suddenly seems absurd. So, how does Kant propose we fix this mess? He suggests that practical reason needs a few assumptions to make the highest good seem achievable, even if pure logic doesn't back them up. These aren't just wild shots in the dark. They're rational leaps born directly from our sense of moral duty. To pursue the ultimate good, we have to buy into ideas like freedom, immortality, and God's existence. These aren't facts you can test in a lab or random beliefs, but are rather a special kind of trust grounded in moral duty. First up is freedom. It's a big deal. Without freedom, moral duty doesn't carry weight. We can't be held accountable if our actions aren't within our control, and moral rules would be pointless if we had no choice but to follow them. Sure, science says everything is bound by natural laws, but to call people out morally, we've got to believe they're free to choose. This isn't something you prove with data, but a practical certainty that stems from our clear sense of moral obligation. Then there's immortality. As it stands, humans can't hit perfect virtue in a single lifetime. The moral law tells us to completely align our will with duty, but we've got personal desires that don't always line up. Developing a will that unfailingly favors duty over personal inclinations is a steep climb for folks like us. So, practical reason chimes in with the idea of the soul's immortality, granting us infinite time to inch closer to perfect virtue. This doesn't guarantee we'll get there, but it means moral growth can continue endlessly, even if absolute perfection remains out of reach. Immortality ensures that progress isn't cut short by death and can keep going indefinitely. Lastly, the concept of God steps into the picture to address the misalignment between virtue and happiness in this world. Virtue is central to this highest good, but happiness is crucial too, because we naturally seek it. The moral law isn't about leading a miserable life. It's about putting virtue first while finding happiness through duty-bound actions. However, since the natural world doesn't automatically reward moral hard work, there's no assurance that a good person will find happiness, or that being happy equals being virtuous. Therefore, practical reason introduces faith in God as a moral caretaker who can ensure that virtue and happiness line up as they should. Kant isn't trying to prove God's existence like a scientist might prove a theory. Instead, he sees God as vital for morality to make sense. God should align the natural world with moral accomplishments, accurately assess moral actions, and make sure happiness is fairly distributed based on virtue. Only such a being could ensure that moral values outweigh mere natural happenings. Kant made it clear that these beliefs don't equal theoretical knowledge about things beyond the physical world. We can't be certain the soul is eternal or God exists, like we're certain about straight-line triangles or gravity. What we have is a sturdy, practical belief based on what moral duty calls for. This isn't just believing without reason or having definitive proof, but a different way of understanding, better suited to practical matters than theoretical ones. The idea of postulates really changed how people thought about classic religious and philosophical concepts. Before Kant, thinkers tried to prove God's existence and the soul's immortality just by relying on logical reasoning, ignoring what we can actually experience. Kant, in his first major work, showed that these logical arguments fall apart because they try to apply principles in places they don't belong. By using practical reason rather than theoretical reason, he managed to uphold the essence of religious beliefs while avoiding the rigid claims that his philosophical critique had dismantled. This fresh perspective on beliefs hugely influenced theology and the philosophy of religion that came after. Instead of trying to pin down religious truths with logic alone, Kant demonstrated that these beliefs are actually grounded in moral experiences and real-life needs. He effectively separated science and faith into two distinct areas of human reasoning. Science deals with how the world appears to us, while religion addresses the deeper needs required by practical reason. The notion of postulates also tackles the big questions philosophy seeks to answer. What can I know? Only what Kant's first critique says is possible. What should I do? Stick to the categorical imperative. What can I hope for? That good actions are rewarded and moral development can happen. These all tie into the bigger question, what is a human being? We are creatures with both rational thought and moral abilities, existing in the space between the physical world and a world of understanding. Part 13. Let's take a trip back to 1790. That's when the renowned philosopher Immanuel Kant released his last major philosophical work, called The Critique of Judgment. This piece was incredibly significant for him because it brought together all the ideas he had grappled with in his earlier projects. In those previous writings, he had tackled the realms of nature and freedom separately. Nature had to do with the universal laws governing the world, while freedom was all about moral choices and actions. But there was a big question lingering. How do these two areas connect, and how does free will function within the natural world? Kant realized there needed to be another mental faculty that tied nature and freedom together, beyond understanding and reason, which he had already addressed. This bridging capacity was judgment, specifically what he termed reflective judgment. Unlike determinate judgment that squeezes specific examples into preset categories, reflective judgment looks for broader concepts or rules for the unique situations we encounter. Reflective judgment plays a crucial role in how we make sense of art and living things. Kant wasn't saying that nature has intentions like people do. Rather, we tend to see beauty or purpose in it, like when marveling at a gorgeous flower or contemplating a complex animal. Even though nature itself doesn't consciously pursue goals, we often interpret certain phenomena as if they do, a perspective that aids us in better understanding the world around us. Kant's work is divided into two main parts. One delves into aesthetics, and the other into perceiving purpose within nature. Despite their differences, both aspects tap into a kind of pleasure our minds experience when our cognitive faculties mesh well while engaging with something seemingly crafted, yet serving no explicit purpose. In terms of aesthetics, this helps us judge beauty and elegance. When it comes to nature, it guides us in understanding living organisms and ecological systems. This third critique isn't just another one of Kant's books. It's a pivotal piece of his philosophy, illustrating how the gap between nature and freedom isn't as wide as it appears. The beauty in nature suggests a harmony between our minds and the world that transcends basic mechanical explanations. Living organisms show an intrinsic purpose that encourages us to see nature through the lens of design and intention, complementing rather than contradicting scientific views. Kant underscored the importance of judgment far beyond what people had thought before. It's much more than slapping labels on objects. It's a creative process that links ideas in new and meaningful ways. In science, reflective judgment aids in finding laws and systematically categorizing the world. Regarding art, it takes us beyond mere understanding, allowing us to appreciate beauty and inspiration. This process also explains how we derive certain concepts from our experiences, as basic categories alone wouldn't suffice for scientific breakthroughs or everyday life problem-solving. Reflective judgment is vital for bridging the gap between the abstract and the real world, making it a cornerstone in Kant's view on human knowledge. This third critique is crucial because it explains how we can feel in sync with nature despite being part of it and having our own moral duties. Seeing beauty in nature makes it seem as if our thoughts and emotions are harmonizing with what we perceive, as though nature aligns with our way of processing things. When examining living beings, we discover their operations resemble the purposeful actions we observe in humans. This allows us, as Kant put it, to believe that nature and our freedom can coexist without conflict. Kant's ideas on beauty and art influence critics in both fields tremendously. He described genius as the ability to create something original that everyone else will try to emulate, a foundational concept in the Romantic view of artistry. His idea that aesthetic creations spark deep reflection without being confined to strict categories revolutionized the way people understood symbolism and poetic language. He also emphasized that art appreciation goes beyond its prettiness or any moral lesson it might impart. It's about recognizing its unique worth. He had grand ideas about biology and science. He viewed living things as having a purpose in nature, not just as mere results of mechanical physics, which set the stage for developments in biology and systems theory. He believed that looking at things with a sense of purpose, or teleologically, was about working within a mechanical perspective rather than inventing stories. This perspective had a big impact on thinkers like Darwin, who used natural selection to make sense of nature's seemingly purposeful designs without needing a divine designer. In his critique of judgment, Kant brought his extensive philosophical efforts to a close by demonstrating how the theoretical and practical worlds, which he explored in earlier works, should be linked coherently. He suggested that instead of conflicting, nature and human freedom are part of a broader understanding that our minds can comprehend through distinct but complementary approaches. This overarching view was crucial for Kant's aim of employing philosophy to achieve a deep understanding of human reasoning in all areas of experience. Part 14. Immanuel Kant challenges the old-school thoughts that linked beauty either to the physical traits of something or to our personal preferences. Instead, Kant describes aesthetic judgment as a unique type of thinking that's personal, yet seems to universally apply. This odd mix of personal yet universal is crucial in our experience of beauty. Kant breaks down our judgments of beauty into 4 parts, tying them to how we typically judge anything else: quality, quantity, relation, and modality. Each of these components highlights what makes aesthetic judgments different from simply determining if something is true or false, or good or bad. Together, they explain what Kant calls judgments of taste, and why they feel right to us even though they aren't based on reason. Firstly, in terms of quality, when we find something beautiful, it's not about its existence, its usefulness, or if it meets our needs. We admire beauty without any interest in practical benefits. This doesn't mean we don't enjoy it. In fact, beauty can give us great pleasure and engage our intellect. The joy we feel isn't tied to fulfilling a need or desire, but in how perfectly it aligns with our mental faculties. Looking at quantity, Kant suggests that when we deem something beautiful, we expect others to see it the same way, despite lacking evidence or rules. For instance, when I say a sunset is stunning, I'm implying that everyone would find it beautiful if they truly looked. But I can't prove its beauty by listing characteristics or rules, as beauty isn't an inherent trait of the sunset. It's about our reaction to it. This leads to what Kant describes as the antinomy of taste, where beauty seems universal yet is unprovable by concepts. He solves this by distinguishing between logical universality, which is provable, and aesthetic universality, which assumes shared human responses. For relation, Kant unveils the notion of purposiveness without purpose. Beautiful things appear designed to be that way for some reason, yet we can't define that reason. Like a flower that seems perfectly arranged, with every element in place. But it's not about accomplishing a specific end. This perceived perfection stimulates our imagination and intellect, which is what aesthetic encounters are all about. Kant separates free beauty from dependent beauty, based on whether we consider an object's intended purpose in our judgment. Free beauty, found in things like flowers, abstract art, and music, isn't based on knowing an object's function. It's about enjoying it as is. When we acknowledge beauty in certain items, it's often while considering their function, like admiring magnificent cathedrals, lavish palaces, or art with clear subjects. Kant's point, particularly with modality, is that when we judge something as beautiful, it's not just a personal viewpoint others might share. It feels as though they should agree if they have sound judgment. It's not logical because you can't prove aesthetic judgments, but he called it exemplary necessity. Beautiful things act as reference points for good taste, encouraging others toward similar appreciation without locking them into a specific reaction. Kant described beauty as the visual form of something appearing purposeful without considering an actual purpose. This definition captures key elements. Beauty is about form, not content, about perceived purpose, not actual goals, and about how we see something, not just understand it conceptually. Beautiful objects strike us as ideally arranged for aesthetic pleasure, not due to fulfilling any obvious external function. They're like symbols of freedom, operating under their own terms rather than driven by outside influences. Kant dug into how the beauty we see in nature stacks up against the beauty crafted in art. He argued that the beauty found in nature has a leg up on artistic beauty because it ignites a moral interest, suggesting that nature jives with our loftiest moral objectives. So, when we take in the sight of a lovely flower, a sweeping landscape, or a majestic animal, it feels like nature is rooting for us, backing up our finest dreams. Sure, art can make us feel deeply, but it doesn't carry that instant moral punch because it's created by humans for humans. Kant's ideas on aesthetic judgment have left a big mark on philosophy and criticism. He was all about the unique nature of aesthetic experiences, keeping them linked to the wider realm of human interests and values. He revealed how these judgments could be personal, but still touch everyone, filled with feeling but also reflecting thought, and how they can be specific, yet set an example. Most importantly, he showed how our appreciation of beauty says a lot about humanity's capacity to see value and meaning in things that might not be useful, but instead invite us to dive deep into their beauty and just enjoy the view. Part 15. The Sublime and the Limits of Imagination. Kant dives into the idea of the sublime as a major form of aesthetic experience, right up there with beauty. He uses it to look at different parts of our human nature and how we connect with the world around us. When it comes to beauty, it gives us a kind of smooth feeling where our mental powers are in sync, giving us straightforward joy. The sublime, on the other hand, is a bit trickier. It starts with a kind of intense tension, but eventually helps us realize something deeper about our own abilities. It's both unsettling and profoundly meaningful at the same time. This deep look into the sublime is closely tied to our moral duties as thinking people. Kant breaks down the sublime into two types, the mathematical sublime and the dynamical sublime. The mathematical sublime kicks in when we come across things that seem way too huge for our senses to handle, like standing at the foot of a gigantic mountain range, gazing at a sky full of stars, or contemplating the vastness of geological time. When our imagination struggles to wrap around these, it points us to our ability to think about infinite ideas that go past what we can actually see or feel, tapping into a kind of logic that isn't tied to our senses. Then there's the dynamical sublime, which shows up when natural forces seem to threaten our very survival, like watching a ferocious storm, a volcanic eruption, or gigantic waterfalls. As long as we're observing these from a safe spot, we get a certain thrill from them. Nature's raw power throws our physical weakness into sharp relief, but it also fires up a realization of our inner moral strength as beings who can rise above this wildness with reason and moral duty. It's here we start to understand that even though we're physically small, our moral chops make us stand tall when facing nature. Experiencing both kinds of the sublime involves a quick shift in feelings, a dance between being pushed away and pulled toward the same thing. At first, the sheer size or ferocity of something seems to overpower our cognitive or physical skills. But then that fear flips to a kind of attraction as we remember our impressive mental ability that isn't as limited. The sublime stands apart from just appreciating beauty, while beautiful things sink effortlessly with our minds, giving us happiness without much of a bump. Things that are sublime first trip us up, stirring up a mix of feelings, some painful or unsettling, before shifting into a more satisfying sense of fulfillment. So, the sublime isn't just about appearances. It's about exploring our higher abilities as moral and thoughtful people. Kant pointed out that the true essence of the sublime isn't in the natural wonders themselves, but in how our minds react to them. Big mountains or fierce storms aren't inherently sublime. They become so because they affect us, leading us to reflect on them with moral and rational thinking. This personal reaction is even more pronounced in the sublime than in beauty, since sublime experiences often lack the neat harmony and symmetry we usually link with beauty. Things that spark a sublime reaction might not even be typically pretty. They might be quite formless or unattractive, but still provoke strong responses because of their sheer size or power. The mathematical sublime shines a light on our unique ability to think about realms that stretch beyond what our senses allow. When visualizing immense sizes is tough, our reasoning jumps in with ideas of infinity that beat experiential limits, rooting sublime experience in deep philosophical insight. On the flip side, the dynamical sublime brings our moral core into focus, highlighting our capacity to stand up to nature's force with moral strength. In the grand scheme, whether we're facing overwhelming natural forces or vast spaces, Kant's perspective on the sublime tells us a lot about the depth of human experience and our capabilities, offering a rich understanding of how we perceive magnificence that goes beyond simple aesthetics. You can't just rely on being gutsy when we're talking about the truly extraordinary. It's about more than just facing the wrath of nature head-on. To really get a taste of the sublime, you need to understand that even in the wildest of nature's chaos, you can still cling to your dignity and adhere to your principles. This concept connects the sublime to our sense of morality and emphasizes that we are rational beings capable of making free choices. Kant's perspective on the sublime left a big mark on the writers and artists of the Romantic period. Thinkers like Burke, Wordsworth, and Coleridge took a page from Kant's book to explore the marvels of nature and the uplifting spiritual feelings it brings. Artists like Caspar David Friedrich created stunning landscapes that captured the intense emotions Kant described. In romantic art and thought, the sublime emerged as a focal point, serving as a link between our perception of beauty and the larger questions about our identity and our place in the universe. Kant's ideas about the sublime also reinforced his moral philosophy by illustrating how our experiences of beauty can touch on our deeper, non-physical nature. Kant argued that the notion of moral freedom isn't just theoretical. It's something we can genuinely feel. When we are moved by the sheer vastness or power of nature, we're reminded that through reason and moral fortitude, we can transcend natural boundaries. This lends an artistic backing to human freedom and dignity. These days, Kant's insights into the sublime resonate with how we view the natural world. The immense scale of nature, the drama of natural events, along with the looming threat of climate change, can stir feelings that align with what Kant referred to as the sublime. The overwhelming scale of environmental issues can cause a mental hiccup akin to the mathematical sublime, while nature's raw power feeds into the dynamical sublime. Basically, Kant's thoughts on aesthetics remain relevant today as we navigate our modern connection with nature. The sublime rounds out our grasp of aesthetics alongside beauty. While beauty helps us appreciate the harmony between our mind and the world, the sublime shines a light on our mind's capacity to surpass nature through reason and moral strength. Together, beauty and the sublime illustrate how deeply aesthetic experiences link us to nature, but also remind us of our potential to rise above it. This makes aesthetic judgment a crucial bridge between our actions and our insights, tuning the balance between our natural and mystical aspects. Part 16. Genius. Kant sees genius as this innate talent, something you're naturally born with, and it kind of raises the bar for the arts. It's not just about mastering skills or things you pick up with practice, though those are vital in actually crafting art, but this distinct capability to create something original and set trends without following any specific instructions. Kant makes a difference between natural beauty and beauty in art. When you see something beautiful in nature, it's like it has a purpose even though it doesn't. It's as if nature's doing its thing without a detailed plan. But art is crafted with intention and thought. So, how does art manage to come across as naturally beautiful and seemingly effortless? Kant says, genius plays a role here. It goes beyond mere planning. Through genius, artists create works that seem to have their own internal logic. There are four main qualities that, according to Kant, separate genius from mere talent or craft. First, genius is all about being original, doing things in a way no one set the rules for yet. Second, creations made by genius become standards that others admire, but without direct imitation. Third, a genius can't really explain their process in a scientific way or hand down their methods as a step-by-step guide. Fourth, you'll find genius in the fine arts, not in areas like science or math, because those rely on logic rather than an artistic touch. Speaking of being original, it's not like artists magically invent everything from scratch or completely ignore artistic traditions. Instead, they modify and reshape what's known into something that feels both necessary and brand new. Like a brilliant composer might take familiar harmonies and structures and spin them in a way that sounds totally new. Or a poet might use everyday words to express profound meanings that transcend normal interpretations. This creative spin on familiar concepts makes art both accessible and intriguingly fresh. The notion of genius sheds light on how artistic traditions evolve and remain vibrant over time. Iconic works by legendary artists endure not simply because they impressed their initial audiences, but because they open up new pathways for future creators to walk. Think of Bach's fugues, Shakespeare's plays, or Michelangelo's sculptures. They serve as examples not because later artists copied them exactly, but because they offered fresh visions for artistic creation and beauty. Kant's view on art also introduces the idea of aesthetic ideas, which is a major contribution of his. An aesthetic idea is like a burst of creative imagination that feeds your thoughts, but can't be fully captured by just one concept. These ideas aren't like logical ideas that require specific intuition. Aesthetic ideas ignite the imagination, akin to how rational ideas fit into Kant's other philosophical works. In art, these aesthetic ideas allow creators to express things without directly stating them. A love poem isn't merely about defining love, but evokes emotions and connections that definitions can't quite capture. A landscape painting is more than an image of a spot. It stirs feelings about nature, time, and humanity that go beyond literal words. A piece of music doesn't point to anything concrete outside itself, but creates an emotional experience that communicates without language. To cultivate these aesthetic ideas, artists employ what Kant calls aesthetic attributes, adding a creative touch to logical thinking. When an artist decides to paint an eagle, what makes you immediately recognize the bird is an eagle or its distinctive characteristics. But art is more than just capturing those features. It evokes emotions and ideas about strength, freedom, and majesty, stretching our imagination beyond the physical traits of the bird. These artistic elements are what give a piece of art the power to communicate messages that go deeper than what you might see at first glance. Kant made a point of separating fine art from other kinds of art, like crafts or entertainment, based on their connection to these deeper aesthetic ideas. For instance, mechanical arts, such as furniture making or engineering, are all about following set rules to achieve practical results. Agreeable arts like crafts or popular entertainment aim to please and entertain without seeking more profound meanings. Fine art stands apart by combining a sense of exploration with intentional depth, creating works that encourage thought and interpretation rather than presenting a single, straightforward message. The idea of genius explains why creating masterpieces isn't just about following a set formula. Producing art involves a blend of imagination, comprehension, and judgment in ways that can't be fully pre-planned or executed just through technique. While artists need to master skills and understand traditions, true originality sparks from instinctive inspiration that you can't predict or even replicate through mechanical means. Teaching art, then, is more about cultivating innate talent than simply sharing techniques or information. This concept of aesthetic ideas has had a significant influence on how we perceive art and interpret its meaning. It accounts for the capability of artworks to be both detail-specific for deep analysis, yet open to a range of interpretations. It shows how art can touch both our hearts and minds without being reduced to mere emotion or thought alone. Art surpasses the confines of everyday language, but remains grounded in shared human experience and cultural traditions. Moreover, Kant's ideas also explore how art and moral development are linked. Art may not deliver direct moral lessons, but it fosters the skills essential for making ethical decisions. Engaging with art expands our imaginative grasp of human potential and sharpens our ability to value things impartially. This artistic sort of education preps us for moral decision-making by training us to look past our self-interests and acknowledge values beyond personal profit. The notion of genius ties together Kant's views on aesthetic experience by highlighting how human creativity leads to things worthy of aesthetic judgment. Just as natural beauty implies a harmony of mind and nature, artistic beauty exhibits our talent to create objects that surpass personal aims or cultural boundaries. This distinguishes art as a remarkable human achievement, showcasing our creative ability and connecting us with the broader community that engages in aesthetic judgment and interpretation. Part 17. Critique of Judgment. Kant delves into teleological judgment, exploring how we perceive the seemingly purposeful design of living organisms and natural systems. Kant understood that merely relying on mechanical explanations, which are essential for scientific inquiry, wouldn't fully account for the intricate behaviors and organization of living things. Yet, attributing everything to divine creation or mystical life forces wouldn't mesh well with scientific principles. Teleological judgment, then, offers a complementary perspective to mechanical explanations, enhancing our understanding without contradicting them. According to Kant, a natural purpose is an entity that is both the cause and effect in a certain respect. In living beings, each component assists other components and the entire organism, and the whole organism, in turn, supports its parts. Imagine a tree. Its leaves conduct photosynthesis to nourish the roots. The roots stabilize the trunk, and the trunk, in turn, supports leaf growth. This cyclical support system doesn't fit into simple cause and effect mechanics, which is why teleological thought recognizes how parts and wholes mutually depend on each other in self-regulating systems. In the 1700s, figuring out the essence of life was a conundrum for philosophers and scientists alike. While mechanics sought to explain all phenomena through the movement of matter under universal laws like those in physics and chemistry, the behavior and organization of living things seemed to resist fitting neatly into this formula. Living organisms reproduce, maintain their structures despite ongoing changes, grow according to internal guidelines, and adapt to their environments. These capabilities appeared to necessitate some sort of intentional causation beyond mere mechanical interactions. Kant proposed that teleological judgment should be viewed more as a heuristic tool rather than a definitive principle. We can't confidently assert that living organisms are unequivocally natural purposes, since that would require knowledge beyond empirical evidence. Nevertheless, to study and interpret their distinctive features, we should regard them as if they are natural purposes. This approach guides scientific exploration without drawing metaphysical conclusions about life's inherent nature or any non-mechanical causes. The role of teleological judgment is to supplement, not replace, mechanical explanations. Scientists should aim to interpret biological processes mechanically as thoroughly as possible, since that method provides the most reliable and predictable insights within the natural sciences. However, when mechanical models reach their limits, teleological ideas can inspire further investigation and suggest new experimental approaches. This blend allows diverse explanatory methods to coexist without forcing biology into a strictly mechanical mold. Kant's investigation into organisms led to what he termed the antinomy of teleological judgment. On one hand, the thesis advocates that all phenomena in the material world can be explained through mechanical laws. Conversely, the antithesis suggests that some natural entities cannot be fully understood this way. Both perspectives hold importance: the thesis for ensuring rigorous scientific methodology and the antithesis for acknowledging the unique qualities of living organisms. Resolving this tension involves distinguishing between determinate and reflective judgment. Determinate judgment operates according to mechanical laws, providing concrete scientific knowledge when phenomena can be subsumed under universal principles. Reflective judgment, which employs teleological principles, offers a framework for contemplating elements that seem to extend beyond strict mechanics. Both are essential for a comprehensive understanding of nature, each functioning on different levels and fulfilling separate roles in scientific inquiry. Kant's approach, which resonated beyond his time, had a significant influence on the development and perception of biological sciences. All right, here's the gist of it. The message here is that biologists shouldn't completely toss out the idea of explaining life through mechanical processes for theories that rely on some kind of mysterious force or substance we can't directly see or touch. But it's also saying that if scientists only concentrate on breaking things down into tiny pieces, they could overlook the bigger story of how life is structured and evolves. The challenge in biology is creating explanations that use known processes while still capturing how living things seem to work towards some goal, yet without saying that goals actually make things happen. Kant's ideas about nature seeming to have a purpose also dive into the grander question of how everything fits together in an organized way. If you think of the universe as just tons of matter interacting mechanically, then where do we get those clear, law-driven things we can study scientifically? This kind of thinking suggests nature appears to have goal-oriented organization, enabling us to understand it scientifically, even if we can't say for sure it's because of a genuine design or just a mental framework we use. Seeing purpose in nature helps organize natural phenomena into systems and find broad laws that connect different observations. This idea of purpose isn't just about biology. It applies to all science. By believing nature is logically organized and classifying things, scientists use these goal-oriented ideas that go beyond just mechanical explanations. It doesn't imply nature is set up for us to understand, but looking at it this way is key for scientific progress. In short, viewing nature as having a purpose is essential for turning philosophical ideas into practical scientific knowledge. Kant's ideas influenced thoughts on evolution and systems biology. Darwin himself read Kant and valued his focus on scientific over religious explanations for things in nature that seem designed. Today, systems biology uses self-organization and feedback concepts that align with Kant's ideas about organisms. Environmentalists also embrace these views, seeing ecosystems as integrated wholes maintained by complex interactions. These concepts relate to today's debates on whether science can fully describe life just through physics and chemistry, or if something more is involved. Kant believed living organisms required a mix of both detailed and big-picture perspectives, reflecting ongoing arguments about the need for more than just physics to understand life completely. His perspective on using purpose as a guide bridges the gap between those wanting to break everything down entirely and others who believe new properties emerge at higher complexity levels. This approach remains crucial for understanding how different scientific explanations come together. Part 18. Kant's political philosophy is renowned for being a comprehensive and significant attempt to ground politics in moral principles, rather than mere strategies or power struggles. Living in a time when revolutions were shaking things up and democratic ideas were taking root, Kant wanted to show how political structures could be designed to respect human dignity, maintain social order, and promote human development. His approach typically emphasizes that justice should always come before sheer practicality, and underscores the need for constitutional frameworks to keep power in check through lawful means. Central to Kant's political theory is the notion of an innate right to freedom. Every person naturally has the right to be free from others' control, as long as this personal freedom can coexist with the freedom of everyone else within a universal legal framework. This fundamental right isn't bestowed by society or government. It is inherent to individuals simply because they are human beings. Political systems are only legitimate when they defend and uphold this basic freedom, rather than restricting it arbitrarily. With this foundation, Kant proposed what he called a republican constitution, viewing it as the sole form of government compatible with human dignity and moral values. Republicanism entails three essential components: freedom for all members of society as individuals, equality before the law, and active participation as citizens involved in the creation of laws. These principles oppose both despotism, where rules are made without laws, and pure democracy, which could allow majority rule to suppress minorities without constitutional checks. A true republican form of government requires a representative system, separation of powers, and constitutional protections for personal rights. Kant made a clear distinction between the form of government and the manner in which it's administered. The structure of government is about who holds the ultimate authority: a single ruler in an autocracy, a small group in an aristocracy, or the people as a whole in a democracy. The style of administration is about how power is exercised, despotically without checks, or republicly with constitutional limits. He argued that republicanism can exist alongside different forms of government, but democracies face the danger of becoming despotic by merging legislative and executive powers. Transitioning from a state of nature to a civil society isn't just an option, but a moral obligation. In the natural state, people have rights, but lack the institutional means to define and protect these rights amidst competing claims. This inevitably leads to conflict, where even the well-intentioned can't ensure protection of rights. Thus, establishing a civil constitution with legislative, executive, and judicial branches is a duty rational beings owe to themselves and each other. Perhaps Kant's most famous political work is his essay, Toward Perpetual Peace, where he outlines the conditions necessary to put an end to wars between nations. He recommended 6 preliminary peace articles among countries, like doing away with standing armies, banning interference in domestic affairs of other states, and phasing out national debts that finance wars. These measures aim to eliminate immediate causes of international conflict and set the stage for long-term peace. For ultimate peace, he proposed 3 major principles for international relations. First, every state's civil constitution should be republican, ensuring decisions about war or peace are made by those who bear the consequences, not rulers who pass the costs on to others. Second, international law should rely on a federation of free states that resolve disputes through legal processes rather than force. Lastly, cosmopolitan rights should be limited to universal hospitality, ensuring individuals have the right to travel and engage in peaceful commerce across borders. The concept of a global federation captures Kant's most radical and forward-thinking political idea. Think about how people have to leave the unpredictable mess of wilderness behind and agree to live by a set of rules. Similarly, countries should move past the disorder on the global stage and establish legal systems to handle disputes without resorting to war. This concept doesn't suggest creating a single world government to strip away national sovereignty, but instead, it proposes a League of Nations that agree to resolve their issues through laws rather than conflict. Each nation would maintain control over its own affairs while agreeing to avoid intimidating other countries. Kant believed that achieving lasting peace wasn't just a dreamy notion. It was actually attainable with three strong arguments supporting it. First, with republican constitutions allowing people to have a voice, war becomes less appealing since citizens, who bear the brunt, tend to resist going to war just for their leaders' whims. Second, trade among countries builds connections, making war undesirable because it's economically damaging for all. Third, as people gain wisdom, they start to understand and respect each other more, reducing cultural misunderstandings that might lead to conflict. Kant's thoughts on international relationships reflect his belief that, despite being divided into different nations, everyone on Earth is part of the same moral community. He wasn't pushing for open borders or equal distribution of wealth globally, but he did emphasize that visitors and refugees should have basic rights and firmly opposed the colonial exploitation rampant in Europe during his era. His ideas have significantly influenced the evolution of international law, human rights, and global governance. When it came to civil disobedience, revolution, and political change, Kant had specific views. He generally opposed revolutions because they destroy the legal frameworks needed to safeguard rights, but he supported gradual measured change through authorized channels. He believed leaders should lead in ways that protect human dignity and nurture growth, focusing on lawfulness over personal desires or immediate public demands. Kant's political theories have transcended academic discussions, influencing real-world institutions and movements. The United Nations founders drew on Kant's ideas about cooperation and maintaining peace among nations. Human rights charters often reflect his views on the inherent dignity of individuals and universal ethics. Modern democracies continue to grapple with Kant's concepts about balancing personal freedoms with collective choices. And in tackling global environmental challenges, Kantian approaches are being adopted to devise solutions that transcend national boundaries. Part 19. Religion within the bounds of mere reason. Kant aimed to show how long-held religious beliefs could be reshaped through reason without sliding into strict theology or outright disbelief. This piece represents his deepest dive into the connections between moral principles and religious faith. Kant discusses how using practical reason can support a hopeful religious outlook while sticking to the limits set by his own philosophical theories. He wanted to keep the essence of religious faith, but ground it in moral experience rather than theories or historical tales. For Kant, the main religious question goes like this: can people genuinely become morally deserving of happiness even though they naturally tend to lean toward wrongdoing? This question isn't one you can answer with theoretical knowledge, as it deals with the roots of moral character that we can't directly observe. Still, practical reason makes us confront this issue because moral actions aim for the highest good, which means virtue and happiness should eventually match up. Here's where religion steps in, offering hope that moral efforts will eventually pay off. When looking into human nature, Kant pointed out what he called radical evil, a trait present in all rational beings with limitations. He didn't mean a pure nature that went bad, but rather an unavoidable tendency to put self-interest before moral duty when the two clash. Unlike the idea of original sin in traditional Christianity, his concept of radical evil isn't about inherited guilt, but about the universal tendency of humans to justify selfish behaviors and shy away from full moral responsibility. It's radical because it strikes at the heart of moral decisions, yet it's not total. Humans can still choose to prioritize their moral duties over personal wants. Overcoming this evil requires what Kant called a revolution in moral disposition. This shift isn't something that can happen gradually. The issue lies in the very principle that guides our decisions, so addressing it means overhauling one's moral character, not just tweaking certain actions. This transformation must stem from individual choice, although it may also need help beyond human means. Religion addresses this by suggesting that divine support can assist in human moral efforts without replacing them. Kant saw traditional Christian teachings more as symbols of morality than as literal historical events. For example, the idea of incarnation reflects the ideal of perfect morality and serves as a model for moral improvement. Atonement highlights the possibility that past misdeeds can be corrected through sincere commitment to virtue. Resurrection embodies the hope that moral integrity can triumph over natural decay and death. These teachings hold religious significance not because they detail supernatural happenings, but because they offer moral insights that promote ethical living. The concept of the highest good is crucial for linking morality and religion. Morality prioritizes virtue as the most important aspect of worth, but it also recognizes that virtuous people should enjoy happiness proportional to their virtue. Since this balance is rarely seen in real life, practical reason demands certain conditions to make it achievable, like divine justice, ensuring that virtue is rewarded, and the idea of a continued existence for endless moral development. These ideas convert moral hope into religious belief without needing theoretical knowledge of things beyond our senses. Kant distinguished between rational faith and historical faith. Rational faith arises from moral principles and involves truths accessible through practical reasoning to anyone, regardless of their culture or history. In contrast, historical faith is tied to specific revelations and traditions. While these might contain rational truths, they aren't accessible through pure reason alone. Believing in historical events can definitely enrich and add layers to rational faith, but it can't quite be the foundation for a religious truth that everyone buys into. That's because it depends on events in history that might have turned out differently instead of being grounded in solid rational ideas. This way of thinking nudged Kant to envision a long-term process where historical religions gradually evolve into groups that focus solely on moral principles. As people grow wiser, they'll steer away from fixating on rituals, quarreling over doctrines, and blindly obeying religious authority. They'll concentrate more on the moral essence that gives religion its true significance. In Kant's eyes, the ultimate church isn't one you can see. It's a spiritual community of everyone committed to doing good, regardless of their religious background or origin. This moral church sets the benchmark for what all historical religions should strive toward as humans grow more mature. Kant also delved into the tricky topic of evil and suffering in our world. Unlike the usual attempts to explain why God might allow evil, Kant focused more on how people can view evil as a chance for moral growth. Difficult times can play a significant role by testing our dedication to doing our duty, enhancing our empathy, and reminding us of our dependence on others and, ultimately, on God. But make no mistake, suffering isn't valuable just for its own sake. Its worth only becomes apparent if it promotes our moral growth and pushes us toward understanding what we ought to do. Kant's perspective on religion hinges on the notion that religious truths should be gauged by their impact on our moral lives, rather than by theoretical arguments. A religious belief is on track if it nurtures genuine virtue, encourages respect for human dignity, and sustains hope for moral progress. But it misses the mark if it squashes moral motivation, justifies cruelty or oppression, or causes despair about our potential for improvement. This practical approach to religious truth underscores Kant's belief that the ultimate aim of our reasoning is to advance moral goodness. Kant's views on religion have profoundly influenced the theology and philosophy of religion that followed. Liberal Protestantism drew heavily from Kantian ideas to develop forms of Christian faith that don't hinge on rigid doctrines. Religious existentialists like Kierkegaard and Tillich appreciated Kant's emphasis on practical faith and moral commitment. Even now, philosophers are still discussing Kantian topics, such as the relationship between reason and faith, the moral implications of religious beliefs, and whether universal religious truths are possible. Kant's writings on religion also reflect his broader belief that philosophy should aid in human flourishing, not just satisfy intellectual curiosity. By rooting religious hope in moral experiences, Kant offered solace to those who couldn't accept traditional theological claims but still sought religious meaning and inspiration. This allows religion to sit comfortably alongside scientific knowledge by rooting religious truth in everyday life, rather than abstract theory. It also makes religious faith accessible to everyone, based on shared moral experiences rather than divisive historical revelations. Part 20. Kant's three major critiques, pure reason, practical reason, and judgment, really shook things up in philosophy. Each one digs into key questions about how we understand the world and what we're capable of, exploring everything from what we can really know and how we should act, to how we experience beauty. Altogether, they cover our intellectual, moral, and artistic capacities in a big way. The critique of pure reason looks at what we can work out through logic and thought. Then, the critique of practical reason delves into how we ought to behave, drawing from moral reasoning. Lastly, the critique of judgment pulls it all together by showing how our tastes and sense of purpose link nature and freedom. But this wasn't just a neat framework Kant cooked up. He truly believed that human reason is fundamentally one and the same, no matter the situation. Whether we're figuring out truths, making ethical decisions, or appreciating art, we're using the same basic ability to make sense of the chaos with self-imposed principles and ideas. Kant's critical philosophy laid out a new path that still influences thinkers today. He turned things around by starting not with what we think reality is, but by looking at what human reason can actually take on. This approach probes into the basic conditions we need to experience things, act ethically, and judge beauty, without pretending to grasp the reality beyond our understanding. Perhaps Kant's most enduring legacy is his emphasis on human dignity based in our rational freedom. He broke away from earlier thinkers who placed human value on intelligence or social roles, asserting instead that dignity is rooted in our ability to self-govern through reason. This notion that everyone has intrinsic worth that can't be traded away has significantly impacted modern concepts of human rights and just governance. His influence extends beyond just philosophy. In real life, Kant's ideas offer a guide for ensuring that both laws and personal actions are fair, emphasizing their universality and respect for others. His thoughts impact debates in fields like business, healthcare, environmental policy, and international relations. His take on moral independence has reshaped how we approach education, therapy, and even the justice system, which now often emphasizes reform over punishment. Kant's take on art and beauty did a lot to change how we see them, too. He viewed aesthetic judgment as personal, but also widely communicable, giving art its own domain while tying it to deeper human values. His insights into what makes someone a genius shook up how people in the 19th century viewed creativity in literature and art. Even now, folks are still grappling with Kant's ideas about the relationship between beauty and ethics, the role of art, and how emotions play into art appreciation. In the realm of knowledge, Kant flipped the narrative by suggesting that understanding isn't just about soaking up information, it's actively shaped by the mind. This idea paved the way for advancements in psychology, cognitive science, and the philosophy of mind, underlining the role our brains play in perceiving the world. Modern discussions on organizing knowledge, shifts in science, and the socially constructed nature of understanding all echo back to how Kant reimagined the role of the mind in experiencing reality. Even philosophers who don't agree with all of Kant's points often acknowledge his key insight that knowing things involves combining sensory input with our need to understand conceptually. Politically, Kant's vision for lasting peace through international law and democratic government has left a big mark. Organizations like the League of Nations, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and a bunch of human rights treaties all reflect Kant's idea of resolving conflicts through laws, not war. Current discussions on global governance, humanitarian efforts, and worldwide democracy owe a lot to Kant's views on universal moral principles and spreading legal systems beyond borders. The European Union is a standout example of his vision for peace and unity amongst previously warring nations in action. Kant's perspective on religion has profoundly influenced both progressive theology and secular views on life's meaning and value. By tying religious belief to moral experience rather than theoretical debates or historical evidence, Kant provided a framework for those seeking spiritual meaning in a scientifically advanced and diverse society. He emphasized using religion as a catalyst for moral development instead of treating it as a source of supernatural facts. This approach has greatly affected contemporary discussions about religious diversity, interfaith interactions, and spirituality's impact on our well-being. Kant's meticulous philosophy continues to captivate individuals seeking a comprehensive grasp of human existence and knowledge. While few today attempt to create equally grand philosophical systems as Kant, his work illustrates that delving into specific issues can illuminate more extensive themes about what we know, how we ought to act, and what gives life meaning. His technique of questioning the essential grounds for various human experiences remains a powerful tool that philosophers utilize across numerous domains. Importantly, Kant's work embodies a perspective on human reason that blends confidence in its capabilities with an acknowledgement of its limitations. Human reason can achieve genuine understanding, make ethical decisions, and appreciate authentic beauty, but only within certain boundaries that can be identified and respected through thoughtful reflection. This balance of rational confidence and intellectual humility provides a framework for addressing difficult problems that require both profound thought and an awareness of our constraints. In our modern era, characterized by unparalleled scientific advances and persistent global challenges, Kant's critical reasoning approach is as relevant and motivating as ever. The fundamental questions he raised, what can I know? What should I do? What can I hope for? What is a human being? Remain crucial to our self-understanding. His comprehensive efforts to address these inquiries through a focused examination of reason itself set a new standard for philosophical thoroughness and breadth. Regardless of whether one agrees with Kant's conclusions, to truly explore the fundamental questions of understanding, ethics, aesthetics, politics, or faith, one must engage with the issues Kant identified and the methods he developed to confront them. This ensures that Kant's influence will endure as long as humanity seeks a reasoned understanding of itself and its role in the universe.